All right, and we are live. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Gumtree of Liberty podcast, episode number 30. We've got a full house for this one. I'm your host, Stuart. I'm joined, as always, by Centrist and by Drew. And Gerrie's back. Hopefully, for good now that the election is over, we'll have you back, hopefully, on the show back full-time. And we're also joined by Kate and James, Lib Dem candidates in the Western Australian Senate election and then the South Australian state upper house election. How's everyone going today?
I don't think I've been up this early since I was coming home from the club, so.
Well, I blame Centrist for this. He said 8 a.m. start Western Australian time. Kids.
He's keeping me honest.
I've got kids and I drank too much last night, so I'm up. That's all right. If I'm up, everyone else should be up.
Well, your beautiful backdrop. That's making me feel nice and calm. And the sun filtering through. Beautiful.
It is. Yeah, I had to switch to this side because it was coming straight in my eyes. It was a bit but it's nice out here.
All right, I guess before we start, Drew's back. He's dropping out. I think connection problems. Before we start, if I can get Kate and Gerrie to give us a rundown of your experiences in the election, because I believe this is both of you, it's your first time running, correct? Running for office first time? Yeah. So can you just give us a rundown of how you experienced it and what you got from the vibe from the voters? Because I know Centrist said that before voting, people were apparently all supporting UAP and One Nation and Lib Dems, and we didn't get that result. So how did it feel for you two?
Kate, you go.
I think I'm still feeling a little bit numb from everything that happened. I'm proud of the campaign we ran in WA. A bit of context for your listeners. So we contested the state election in March 2021, and we lost our only upper house seat at that election. So not only did we have to rebuild the party from that loss, we had a federal election to contest. So I came back to the party in December. I was working at another job, which was a conflict of me to be involved in the party. So I actually quit that job, came back to the Lib Dems and ran as the lead Senate candidate and the leader of the party here. So we had 5 months to not only just rebuild the party, but to contest one of the toughest elections of a generation. So I'm proud of the campaign we ran here. We didn't have the resources that the eastern states had. Everything was quite last minute, as Centrist probably can attest to, one of our loyal volunteers. So we learnt a lot, and I'm proud of our results here. It's not what we were expecting for any of the freedom parties, but for Western Australia specifically, especially my Senate result, to be up there in the 2%, which is equal to what the eastern states had, I'm very proud. And it actually gives me hope. The people that I've met during this campaign, like Centrist and James, who came over from South Australia to help, there are so many passionate people who love freedom. So while it wasn't the result we wanted this time, we do have 2.5 years to prepare for the state election in WA. And I'm really hopeful. We are going to be a formidable force in the future, and we'll take a lot of lessons from this election into the state campaign.
And how about you, Gerrie?
Yeah, I could echo all that Kate said. I am proud of everything that we did. We had a small team of about 10 or 12 committed people. And I am proud of what we did. And I am very grateful for having had the opportunity to do it. And hands down, the best experience of my life. Now, I had been involved in political campaigns before, as I have about 15 years political experience behind me. But that is very different than actually being a candidate. Next level. And as Kate said, the disappointing thing is that we did not get the result that we had all hoped for. And it is something that's probably the one thing that's going around and round in my head is what happened. Where were the two? Where was the support of the last 2 years with the Put the Majors last campaign, running really hard, Topher Field running that marble video, which really simplified the preferencing system for everybody, but it just doesn't seem to have panned out. And for me, one of the exercises I did soon after was added up the votes of the 4 Freedom candidates in my seat here in Lilley and compared them with the 2019 votes of the minor parties. And to my shock, it was the same. Not to the exact number, but the same. And when I asked several other Queensland candidates to do the same, they came up with the same result. Now, that was an eye-opener because I don't know what happened there. Now, clearly it's a mixture of maybe some people didn't vote or people, as Centrist was saying earlier, they just want change. They are stuck to the duopoly, which again still stuns me in that we did run the whole freedom movement ran that campaign for putting the majors last. It didn't work. It is really mystifying. But having said that, I'd do it all over again. I loved it. I've met people who are amazing. And as far as the UAP is concerned, candidates that I came to know, they were just like every one of us here on this call. Everybody that I have anything to do with in the freedom movement, particularly ALN, these people are top rate and they think the same as us. So it was a great experience for me personally.
Now, James, you ran in the SA state election and came 13th with their 11 seats up for grabs. Did you see any trends repeating at a federal level that you saw in the SA election, aside from the fact that Labor won?
Well, I mean, I think that's kind of it, right? Labor won in the state election, and I remember saying it after. I was quite surprised when Labor won in the state election, at least as convincingly as they did. And I was sort of saying that as it happened in the federal election, but people didn't want to hear it. But, you know, we largely saw the same thing that we saw in SA play out nationwide. But I will say that in South Australian election, there's there's about 1 million registered voters in South Australia. There was 140,000 people that voted for either myself, One Nation, Australian Family Party, Family First, and a few of these other independent sort of what would have been come to call freedom-friendly parties. So that's a significant block. That is more than the Greens. The Greens got about 100,000 odd, and it's more than the informal voting count. So I think that's something to take away from it. And I didn't quite hear. I had a few technical issues, so I didn't quite hear what everyone else said prior. But I think it's important to note that this has only been 2 years, right? We're all a little bit disappointed. We're all a little bit disheartened. But this has only been 2 years. You know, the Greens have been going at this, you know, sort of from a cultural standpoint, at least, since about the 60s. You know, for us to think that in 2 years we can turn it into this huge voting block is quite naive, I think. And I think we're seeing the reality of that now.
And I think, secondly, on that point as well, having 3 freedom parties effectively, plus some other smaller minor parties, means that the voters get split between those 3, and resources get split between all 3. So it's whether or not you guys think it's because of that split there, you basically are giving votes to Labor because the freedom parties are so disunited. Because I know that there was talk of, was it working between One Nation and Lib Dems, I believe, at some point, and some One Nation candidates didn't like that, and then when the UAP got involved, some people didn't like working with them. So whether it's a fact of disunity by the freedom parties?
Push back on, sorry, I'll just push back on that a little bit. The people who were voting, Lib Dems, One Nation, UAP, etc., were all aware of how they were going to preference, which I think was a big thing. So that voting block might seem like it was broken up, but I think all the people who voted for those parties had already preferenced the way they were going to. I think just what we've seen is a move towards guaranteeing change, and that means Labor, because Liberals have been in power for so long. So I think what we would have seen is a lot of number 2 votes went to Labor versus, which is probably why we saw the red wave come across, as opposed to number 2 votes going Liberal, if that makes sense.
Well, I think also what we've got to look at is how preference discipline actually plays out. We're really not sure, particularly at least in the Senate, we're really not sure how preference discipline is going to play out. It's quite a unique election, this one. So, you know, there's still a chance, say, in Victoria and South Australia, where I'm from, for potentially, you know, quote unquote freedom-friendly minor party to come in. So it may play out that way. Historically, it doesn't play out that way. So we'll see what if preference discipline actually does hold, and that will be interesting to follow.
Which is interesting because you know how there was such a big focus on the preference system. That's what is the surprising thing, though, James, is because I agree with you. It's complicated and perhaps people don't pay attention, but there was such a focus on the preferencing system. And, you know, it's easy to ask yourself, well, then why didn't it work? There was a call, I recall Andrew Wilkie, when he won his seat, I forget the year he did, back in Tasmania, and no one thought he would win that. And he ended up, because we went right through the preference system with a political educator in Queensland, and she did it. It was amazing how in the end it worked. It worked exactly as Topher did it, very simply with the marble video. And yet I haven't seen any of that from our scrutineers in this election, or heard it, that it's worked quite like that. Just with all the emphasis on it, it really is disheartening that we didn't see more of that come into play.
Well, I think it's you know, like we get trapped in this bubble, people like us, you know, people that are very politically active. You know, we're all candidates here, or we're journalists. Everyone on this show right here. So I think we get a bit trapped in our bubble. Really, at the end of the day, most people, I would argue that most people don't really know how the system works. Most people don't really know our preference deals, and most people don't really care. You know, so that they'll take a card that they see on the day, and they might follow that roughly. So if we're not getting people out to booths, if we're not manning booths, then it's that message will never really come across to a lot of people. And I mean, if you look at Labor, for example, they man, like, whatever you can say about them, right? They know how to man a booth. If you go to, you know, Kate and I went to several booths on election day, and you know, you go to any booth and there's like 6 or 7 Labor people there, and then there's probably 1 or 2 undercover as well that are watching from afar. So, you know, it's about that as well. And ground game is very important. And I think it's a lot of these parties, you know, the Liberal Democrats included, are just learning sort of the importance of that, and just really getting our heads around and how to organise that, and how to, you know, contain such a massive beast of you know, volunteer organisation.
Well, the union movement has a lot to do with that for the Labor side.
Definitely.
Yeah, but the Liberals also had their crew there as well. I think it goes to show how much the system is stacked towards the duopoly. And by stacked, I don't necessarily mean it's corrupt or anything. I just mean that it just sort of favours the people who have already been in the system set up to continually encourage the 2 major parties. And you can tell that just by the number of the votes they get. They make millions of dollars every election, so that's why they're prepared. Like, I was at the booths that I was at, there was thousands and thousands of dollars worth of signs up. Like, I don't know how much one sign would get you per vote, but like, they overspend by crazy amounts. And I think the voting, the public don't realise just how much money these guys make off of the election, off the taxpayers by the end of it, which I think is something that maybe we can work on. Kate is educating voters on how much money is available to the 2 major parties when they win their number 1 preference seats.
Yeah, and the other thing I'd like to add is it's very hard to campaign as a potential senator. So the senators who were up for re-election, they didn't do anything. They literally just swung in on the coattails of their party name. I was out there, and James was here with me, and you saw me too, Centrist. I was out there, I went down to Margaret River, put my gun call fleet out the front of the police minister's office. I was out there doing everything I could to raise awareness of the party, myself, and the brand. And the senators that got elected, they literally did no campaigning. So we're already facing an uphill battle. And like you said, we don't have the resources that the big parties have. UAP had a bit more money than us. I only got my call flukes 2.5 weeks before the election because we were scrambling around for money because we're not cashed up. So it is an uphill battle, but we've got 2.5 years for the state election. I'm hoping that dissent towards McGowan will grow. I think it is. So there is a movement happening, and we've just got to keep the passion going for the next state election.
I think I just want to chime in here. I don't think it's just dissent that will grow, but people will relax. So people are a lot still in COVID fear mode, and that phrase mass formation psychosis, I fully believe that's a thing, and that is still in play now, and we're still everybody's sort of taking a deep breath and letting go of COVID paranoia. And I think that ultimately manifested at the ballot box with safe voting, practices and sort of what we know, who we know. So it'll take time for people to let go, to relax, and maybe find freedom again. And I remember saying this when I first joined ALN, guys, we're not going to get this overnight. This isn't going to be turned around at the next election. My instinct was this is like a multi-generational fight, Guys were like, we got to get it. We got to get it now. We got to have this election turn around. And I think to some degree we did turn around, and, the ALN exists for example, this podcast exists right now. We are coming together, people who care about liberty, to spread the word and start spreading that message. And it's kind of ground zero now, if you ask me.
Well, I think one person who's commented on this quite well is Joel Jamal from Turning Point Australia. He said, this election is about quantifying the freedom movement. There's also another broader discussion about what exactly the freedom movement is. But putting that aside, this election is actually about quantifying the freedom movement, seeing how big it is. And it's really about future elections are about making a change and seeing what we can do. So I think people were maybe expecting a little bit too much from this election, when really we should just have a look and see what we've got and take stock of that and be able to move forward from that.
Yeah, James and Drew, you are right. I think just from my own personal point of view, because I'm a historian and the focus of my last 10 years of study has actually been liberal democracies and how they roll over into tyranny. So I think it was way too close for me. So I probably had higher expectations than I ought to have had. But, I've studied it, I've read it, I see the patterns, I see the triggers and everything. And I just want to shake everyone up, because what I had on the pre-poll enough was questioned about freedom. What do you mean about freedom? And the most enlightening conversation I had was with a journalist from The Australian. Now, we weren't at our biggest pre-poll. The media was there every single day, every outfit, and they never spoke to the freedom candidates, not one of us. And the Lib Dems guy, Daniel, approached Channel 9 one day and said, I want to have a say. Oh, no, we're not here to talk to you. We're only here to talk to the Labor incumbent. And then on the last day of pre-poll, it was pouring rain. I saw the press hanging around. I decided to go up there and ask them, who are you here to see? Well, we're here to see one of the candidates. And I said, yes, but which candidate? It's none of us. Why don't we have a voice? I spoke to them for half an hour, and it is quite shocking that they don't care about freedom. He said to me, what are you doing here? And he flicked at my how to vote cards I had in my hand and said, freedom is a non-word. You're wasting your time because we aren't free. None of us are free. And even more shocking than that, he said that the reason we have such a great civilized nation is because the politicians we have made it that way. Now, that was what I was, and because I love conversation, I love being involved in debate, and I knew that we were never going to get in the press, so I felt it was an opportunity for me to have a voice, and I kept pushing back on him. There was no way to cut through. This is, you know, the Australian newspaper. That is their view of freedom. It's a non-word.
Gerrie, those
that
are
was the day that I went
dinosaurs.
down, and I remember. Sorry, you go, Drew.
Yeah, I was just going to say, Gerrie, you're talking to dinosaurs, and they can see the asteroid coming, right?
Yeah.
The asteroid is in the sky. It's approaching them. I've seen some recent commentary about the Johnny Depp Amber Heard trial, just to paint a picture. The Washington Post are saying this is an avenue for the alt-right, you know, and far-right extremism is growing, toxic masculinity through this decision, you know. They're dinosaurs and they can see social media, and that's the asteroid, right? So, you know, what we're doing right now, YouTube, Twitter, Facebook, it's all a bit toxic. Don't get me wrong. I kind of hate it, but it is eating away at those media dinosaurs. They won't matter in 10 years.
Yeah.
We won't be dealing with them anymore. So let them focus on Labor and Liberal for now. In 4 years' time, they won't matter even less, right? So think about it like that. The long game is that those guys are dying.
Well, I agree with you. I felt it was the only chance, Drew, I had to have a voice, and that's why I grabbed it. And it was interesting because we tease it out, and every conversation you have with people, you know, is reinforcing and then helping us know what we have to do as libertarians. And the important part that I know Centrist has raised as well is that it's our job now to talk about liberty and libertarian, because it doesn't have an ideology.
I think one of the biggest
problem.
issues, I think part of the problem is that the messaging wasn't right. I think not in terms of necessarily the concepts behind the ideas that were pushed forward. I thought how we, especially with the Lib Dems, how they approached engaging their audience. I warned John Ruddick at the start about going too hard after the right wing vote in terms of trying to steal liberal voters, because I said it's going to alienate a whole heap of people who aren't actually who agree with you on nearly all the points that you raise. But if you keep pushing yourself as this right wing party, which libertarianism isn't a right wing party, then you're going to end up. It's going to backfire. And that's what we saw at the election. A lot of people thought that the Lib Dems were just another right-wing party, as opposed to the messaging where we could have, like, you look at the legalized cannabis party, got a heap of votes. And there's a whole range of voters there. Yeah, there's a whole range of voters there who could have voted for the Lib Dems to get the same result that they wanted, but with better economic policies and, you know, things that have been thought out. But the messaging from the Lib Dems was, I think, lacking in terms of appealing to the wide spectrum of the political compass. So,
and we see
I wanted to say that I went down to see Gerrie on that last Friday, 20th of May. Yeah, of May. And it was miserable weather down there. And I caught up with you just after you spoke to the Australian, and they said to you that when it comes to stuff like this, like, you're smarter than this. You know, why are you running for the UAP and believing in this? You're smarter than this. It's just like complete disconnect in the corporate media to the rest of the world.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. Stuart was there that day. It was great to have him there. So grateful for the support. Yeah, he did. He just said, "You're smarter than this. Go back to the Liberal Party." That's what he said. I said, "I left the Liberal Party for a reason. I'm not going back, and I never will." This was the one opportunity, as we all do, for whatever vehicle we chose. We have our own reasons, which we're entitled to do, but we try. But right now, the duopoly is toxic. To me, it doesn't exist. I want nothing to do with it.
But I think we're
to your point, Centrist, about messaging. So obviously we had the Freedom Manifesto, which were 10 policies to save Australia, and our COVID alarmism one is something that UAP and us were united on. But most of the rest of that document was about economic policies. And I spoke to my mum about that because I was watching the Greens celebrate their win. And I just said to my mother, like, how can people vote for these people? Their taxes are going to go up. They don't understand the cost to the economy that they're going to have. What about the debt? And my mum said, people are living week to week, Kate. They don't want to think about government debt when they've got their own debt. So while it's great that you care about the future, because she's a teacher, I said, the kids that are coming to your school are going to be saddled with debt. And she said, but their parents are already saddled with their own debt. So I think for the Lib Dems, like, while we are fantastic economic managers, and most of the people at the top of the party are economists, our founder, Dr. John Humphreys, is a world-leading economist, it was just the wrong time to be pushing that message, because people are still recovering from COVID. People are still getting payments from it. So while it was good for us to talk about that, it was just the wrong timing. And people were voting the Greens because the Greens were there to help them. And you could see them walking in to vote. Their eyes were just like, please save us, and taking Greens how to vote cards because the Greens were there to save them. So it's going to be very hard to get that message across. But the good thing is we've got Labor for 3 years with the Greens and the Teals. So it's going to be a lesson, a 3-year lesson that we all have to suffer through. But it's going to be a chance for us to educate people about this is what you get when you don't scratch below the surface.
To add to what you're saying, Kate, I think, and this is where my point about messaging comes across. Campbell Newman obviously has his detractors, but he passed up an absolutely perfect opportunity on the Q&A. Like, I turned it off after he missed the opportunity to talk about raising the tax-free threshold when the lady asked about, like, I'm struggling to make ends meet, I'm studying and I'm working. What are you, like, how can we help people? And the tax-free threshold raising does more than an artificial minimum wage rise. And I think that there was like a golden opportunity to get people to actually stop and think about how the economics work and how you can actually help people by basically just not taking so much from people. And I think people have become accustomed to the fact that we pay so much in tax that obviously there's no other way to do it. But I think I did some numbers, and you get about $6,000 back in your pocket when we raised it to 40K. Like, that's more than any artificial pay rise that's going to be counter-inflated, like from inflation. So I think that there was a perfect opportunity that was missed. And I think that came from the fact that we were looking at the Lib Dems specifically on the East Coast were looking too much to the right-wing voters as opposed to how can we actually help people, and like how can we explain to people that by doing these things, you're actually going to be better off versus the big corporations or the billionaires who you think don't pay enough tax anyway. But they always go, the Greens that always go, oh, we're going to tax the billionaires. I'm like, well, stop taxing the people who are footing the bill at the moment. Like, it's easy to say, oh, we're going to go after the billionaires, but if you're not, why not help the people at the bottom at first? So
I have a question, hypothetical, to throw the group on messaging. Is it too serious? Are we too serious? Like, is there room for particularly Lib Dem brand to ride the meme wave? You know, to get out there more of a positive, happy, fun messaging. I'll get Stu to share this tweet that I just posted. It's an Elon Musk tweet, and you know, I'm a Musk fanboy. I admit it. I ride the Musk fanboy wave, but I think the cultural lightning rod that we're all looking for in this country, we completely lack. Right now, he is the guy in the States driving the conversation more than anybody, and he's doing it through stupid memes. And I wonder if, you know, I was constantly tweeting at the Lib Dems Australia account to say, where's the Bitcoin platform? Where's the Bitcoin messaging? Where's how are we talking to the new generation of kids out there? Because they talk in memes and emojis. And I think we really need to modernize the conversation and just have fun. You know, this is stupid. It's stupid. It's funny. It's hilarious. And it's a way of getting people on board for the serious conversation. So is there room for that, guys, in the Lib Dems, do you think?
I definitely think so. I mean, I think Kate can speak to a bit of it. She's got a strong meme game there, so I think she can speak to a bit of it too. But I mean, like, if there's anything I've learned over the last few months of, you know, being a candidate, is that people don't really care about like you know, we all of us here care about policy, but the average person doesn't really care about policy, right? They care about a human that they can relate to, and they care about messaging that's simple and easy to get across, right? There's a reason why the major parties use these like jobs and growth, or, you know, build back better, or with these 3-word slogans, because they're effective, because they work, right? And I definitely think, you know, there's a good saying, it was by Andrew Breitbart, I believe, which is like, no one can resist the truth when it's wrapped up in a good joke. And I think there's a lot of truth to that. You know, people like, if you can have and that's the good thing about a joke as well, is if you can have a simple message that you can communicate effectively and it's funny, well, I think it's going to go a long way, and it's going to do a lot of advertising for you.
100%.
Yeah, I agree, Drew, and that's hard for me because I take it all so seriously. I do. I think it's so important, but this election has shown it. Absolutely. Except that top one. I know that's revolting.
Yeah.
I saw that meme you posted.
I
this
agree,
morning.
but
I immediately had to share it with my friends. I'm like, this is comedy gold. Unfortunately, the problem you do run is you end up being like the Liberals and Labor. Their ads and their memes, you know, are just horrible. I mean, most of them they're probably made by boomers.
It's an opportunity space because they can't meme.
Yes. Yeah, but you say that though. But that song, you know, there's a hole in your bucket. That my son, at 6 years old, was singing that at school. Like, that hit home. Dear Labour. Yeah. That resonated. That was actually they did really well with that. It didn't result, but like that definitely got messaging across for them. But I think your son could vote. Yeah. Well, he with less government, which is good. The thing is, we've got to. It's a two-pronged attack, because it's not just you've got to engage in the younger audience in terms of trying to just get their vote. You've actually got to try and convince people to start thinking about what this means in terms of voting. The school system, like my son was year 6, so he was doing some of the politics stuff leading up to the election, but they only ever really talked about Labor and Liberal. And that's in the school system. So you already got kids who don't understand, like even at the age like year 6, like don't realize how our system works. And it's a complicated system. And I think we lack in education around what it means with your preferencing and stuff, and how you can actually so not only do you have to do the funny stuff and try and get people to pay attention to the party, but you've also got to re-educate people on how to vote, which I think is probably the hardest battle that we're looking at. But I see that there's potential there, because if we should be clever enough to ride the coattails of what's happening in America. And I know people are like, oh, American politics is different, but the rise of the Mises Caucus in the Libertarian Party shows what a ground game can do. They've been going since 2016, I think. The Mises Caucus is when they started.
16, 17, yeah.
Yeah, and so that's like, what's that now? Nearly 5 years, 6 years, or whatever it is. That by the time they've actually managed to take control of the Libertarian Party. So, if we're clever enough, we should be able to angle that sort of social, ride that wave kind of thing, because a lot of people who are into the political scene do follow what's going on in America. And I think that was probably one of the best things Trump ever brought to the thing, was actually made people pay attention to politics. But yeah, if we're clever enough, we should be able to ride those coattails. And I think there's a potential there, but we've got, like I said, it's not just about memes and getting people's attention. It's going to have to take messaging and re-education about how the system works.
Do the Lib Dems have, sorry, real quick, did the Lib Dems have a factional problem? or blockers or issues that we need to be addressed?
I
see
think-
James smiling.
I think it's in any party. I don't know about the other minor parties. Look, there is a degree of factionality within the Liberal Democrats, particularly with the new members come in and the sort of ex-Liberals come through. But I think the beauty of libertarianism is the ability to decentralize, right? So there might be some states where they want to pursue that way a bit more, whereas some other states might not. And I think that's really the answer. Look, I think there is structural change that definitely needs to happen within the party. But I don't think that's really the problem. I think the problem is a lot deeper. And I think the problem is cultural, right? And politics is downstream from culture. And I think, as I said, I think at the start when I was introduced, if you look at what the Greens have been running this game for 60 to 80 odd years. Maybe not them as the party, the Greens, but the cultural idea, right? You look at ESG, permeated culture.
I agree, James.
ESG
But Jordan Peterson says, "Clean your room," right? We've all heard "clean your room," right? So do we need to clean the room of the Liberal Democrats so that we can go out into the country and be taken seriously? That's
I think the one problem that James can attest to as well is we're already facing an uphill battle purely because of our name. The number of people, especially in my age group, that hears the word Liberal and then tunes out, or hear Liberal Democrats and think we're an offshoot of the Liberal Party. Like, we know what our name stands for. We understand what a liberal democracy is. Our name is a direct reflection of what we stand for. But people in the community don't see it like that. So James had this problem too, and I faced it because they hear the word Liberal and they tune out, because unfortunately, the word Liberal is now toxic in Australia because of the Liberal Party. So the problem that we have in a party at the moment is, are we going to change our name at a state level? At a federal level, we have to because of the ruling in the High Court. But now there's a whole other battle within the Lib Dems about keeping the name at a state level or not. So everyone has an opinion and no one knows the right answer. But it's clear when the Liberal Party is down and when the community doesn't like Liberals, our vote suffers. So are we going to keep riding this coattail of, well, when the Liberal Party are up, we'll get name confusion and then we'll go up, or are we going to stand on our own 2 feet? James and I think it's time for us to stand on our own 2 feet, but we have to fight that battle internally.
Yeah, definitely. I think that's a big thing.
Yeah, the name change
Branding.
is going to be vital.
Huge.
Yep.
Huge.
Well, I think, if you look across the ditch, right, you look at ACT over in New Zealand, they're very successful. And, they're not as libertarian as the Liberal Democrats, but they're, I'd much rather have them as a government or even as an opposition than Labor or Liberal, right? So we've got to look at what they've done. And New Zealand's actually a harder system because they don't have an upper house. It's not bicameral. So we've got to look at what they've done over there and what they've done so successfully. And we've really got to bring it across over here, because if it would permeate in New Zealand, you'd think it'd also permeate over here.
What's the name? ACT?
ACT.
Is that an acronym for something?
It is. I forget what the acronym actually is, though.
Have the Lib Dems locked in the name change at the federal level yet, or is it still up for debate?
Well, it's been changed in the Constitution, but I think they want to revisit it and they want to do a whole branding change. Is my understanding.
Maybe
they wanted to change to, what was it, liberty and democracy, which I think is too much, and I don't think it's messaging well enough. You can still keep the Lib Dems by just calling it libertarian democracy if you wanted to, but I think it's going to be key going forward to have libertarian as part of your name. I think that's going to be something that, because then you can latch that on to other cultural, like we said, culture is going to drive this movement. So we need to be then sensible about how you're going to so we need to be sensible and clever about how we change the name, because if we're going to just go liberty and democracy, I don't think it's going to be successful.
Yeah, my understanding was that was just used as a bit of a stopgap, that name, but I totally agree. I think it needs to be a proper rebranding.
Yep.
The meme team.
I think libertarian, as Centrist said, is definitely got to be in the name.
Yep.
That would probably be a game changer too, for people to identify whether they're in other parties going forward with what they want to pursue liberty. You're going to attract people. because that is a whole different. I mean, libertarianism is it's standalone.
Yeah.
But anyway,
And it doesn't buy into the
And
left-right bullshit. It separates
No.
itself from the left and right, which I think
That's
is
it.
really
And we
important going forward.
And we're essentially the 51st state of the US at the end of the day.
Yeah.
Culturally, we are just downstream from them. So we get that residual, payoff. It makes sense to me too, libertarian.
Yeah, I'm not sure whether Libertarian, like I used to think Libertarian Party is probably the way to go. I'm still, I still think it's definitely there as a possibility, but I think it, like we love the idea of libertarianism, but most people in Australia don't know what libertarianism is. If you ask someone what liberty is, they'll probably tell you it's a petrol station. So, I think you've got to, like, look at how well legalized cannabis did, right?
Yeah.
And they had zero ground game. They had about $20,000 budget for the whole country.
Yeah,
But I
And
think-
because people look at the ballot and they go, I like weed, I'm going to vote for legalized cannabis, right? It does, the name does the advertising for itself. I'm not saying
Well,
we're going to do something like that, but
I think
it's worth
that's
looking
why
at.
it's important to have the libertarian in there, because we're not, like I said, we're starting from scratch now. You've got to build this up, and in order to build something up, you need to associate. And you're right, not many people know what libertarianism is in Australia. Like I didn't know until 3 years ago what libertarianism was, but with that messaging and with that creating that third alternative to the left-right dichotomy, is that you can then build that culture. Like you said, it's culture. You got to build that up. And I think having libertarianism as a name is going to be a very important role, especially if we want to ride Dave Smith's coattails. Because I think Dave is, regardless of personal opinion, I think Dave does a really good job on, despite having his very strong beliefs in terms of where he sits on certain issues, he's very strict to the libertarian principles of, just because I think one thing, we don't necessarily like that. The government still shouldn't have that say. And I think that's a thing that we should be looking at as messaging and growing that culture at the bottom level, if that makes sense.
well, libertarianism should be the driver for people to understand how important it is that government needs to be much, much smaller and out of our personal life. And that's
I think that case study in the legalized marijuana party and the success there really demonstrates how getting specific can draw people in. They're familiar with the issue, and libertarianism is so broad. I think you'd almost do better by being more specific to a certain area. Like say you became and hypothetical, right? So I've got a few ideas. Hypothetical, you become the Bitcoin party, right? Or the crypto party, right? I think that already probably exists, but it's so specific that you draw in a bunch of people just because they're familiar with that one area. The other idea sorry, someone saying something?
Sorry, I was just going to say, like the problem with that though is that you then become a one-issue party, which libertarianism isn't a one-issue party, and it's hard, it's easy to get stuck into that. Like, cause the legalized cannabis party has been around for a long time. Like this, they aren't new either. They've been in WA.
Yeah, but they used to be called Hemp, and then they changed their name, and they were a lot more successful.
Yeah,
but they've also had a big ground for a long time. Like they've been around for a long time.
If you're results driven, then what gets you in power or gets you at the table, right, is kind of the question. The other idea I tweeted the other day was the nuclear party. I don't know if this exists, but the nuclear party, energy sustainability, military, and family, right? You could run on those three pillars as the nuclear party. And I think one of the biggest problems we had at this election, and the reason why the Teals exist now, is because the Liberals didn't give us any alternatives on the energy debate. They should have put nuclear on the table 10 years ago and fought like hell for it. And they didn't. Yeah. And now we're here, and gas is just now in crisis territory. You know, where inflation up in the roof, and you know, we could be facing real economic issues very soon as a result of not.
Labor's solution was to open up more coal, which is ironic considering people voted for him to
open
not
up
do
more
that.
coal and put up the minimum wage to battle inflation, incredible.
If I had my way,
Aspen Island as well, and they're getting flack from the left for renaming it to Queen Elizabeth Island instead of using an Indigenous name. So they're getting flack from their own side for it now. It's hilarious to watch.
if I had my way, I would call it the Guns, Drugs and Nuclear Party.
Sex, drugs, and rock and roll party.
Yeah.
I love it.
That reminds me of a book that guy wrote, Guns, Germs and Steel.
Steel, I've read that.
Guns, Germs. The germs is kind of, you know, with all the COVID
What is it?
stuff.
Is it guns, drugs, and nuclear? Guns, drugs, and is that it?
Yeah, they're the 3 issues. They're my 3 hot button issues. So maybe I'll try and move a motion to rename it that in WA and see how we go.
Good luck.
I think with the Lib Dems, the energy approach to how the messaging went out, I think was one of the biggest fall downs for the Lib Dems. This whole anti-climate extremism. Well, we all agree that it's like probably they're overplaying their hand, the crazies on the like the world's going to end type shit. But you could have ran on, we want to end subsidies for coal. We want to end subsidies. You know, like there was still a huge batch of the left that you could have got in terms of votes, but our messaging was, fight climate extremism. And I'm like, yeah, but a lot of the public think that it's a good, and they're not wrong. It's a good thing to try and move into different energy sectors. Like it's not a bad idea. But it was done like, oh, you're all crazy if you think there's an issue with the climate. So I think that was one of the big ones that like didn't translate well. And I tried to warn, I think it was Ruddick at the time. I'm like, you need to look at who you're messaging to, because the people who have already left the Liberal Party were already voting for you anyway. You need to look at who you need to get over from the other side. And the policies for the energy sector were good policies. Like they were, you could argue it from a left or a right point of view in terms of how the climate was affected and how you can actually benefit people in terms of legalizing nuclear and allowing, like ending coal subsidies, etc. But I think that was just another opportunity missed as well.
But
I definitely agree with you there.
A lot of it comes down to this fear of, especially the political class, too afraid to speak. And until people in positions of influence and in the public that have some draw are actually able to speak out, well, if they're put in a position to be able to speak out and speak truthfully, nothing will change. It's to do with this whole scripted world that politicians live in, too afraid to talk. I mean, probably most of us, or all of us here on this show, would know everyone agrees with nuclear, and so it would reverberate out, and yet it's not spoken about. You know, it's taboo. It
is though just a general lack of leadership in the Liberal Party. I think that is to blame here for this one particular issue. No one took the fight on this. And I was surprised. I was calling it like 2 years ago. I'm like, Scott Morrison is going to run on nuclear. That's the platform for the next election. Like, it was a no-brainer to me, and they didn't do it, and I don't know why.
He's the biggest failure as a Liberal Party leader ever. I mean, the man had nothing to stand on. He had no conviction at all. And
it feels that way.
Well, it was with everything. I mean, it's the nuclear. It's we're going to make vaccines as mandatory as possible. The next week we're not. Then he sets up the National Cabinet. I mean, the whole thing was a farce. But the Liberal Party have lacked leadership for longer, for even before Morrison. Leadership is like like you said before, Drew, it's almost like it's a dinosaur. We've got to make leadership good again. Somehow, people with strength to be able to speak out, to be able to speak and have a debate, even if you don't agree with people. That's what I want to see ending in this country, that you don't get vilified for having an opinion.
Yeah, it's dangerous. We're in dangerous waters. And this is, you know, when I talk about that multi-generational fight, I don't disregard that idea that we are deep in dangerous water right now, and the trends are really alarming. And you know, when you talk about people being vilified for their opinions, it is dangerous territory that we're in, where we start to self-censor and we start to just shrink the Overton window of acceptable opinions. That's what's going on right now, and we're there, and we have to fight back. We have to start. And yes, politically, we weren't able to just get it off the ground. Or I shouldn't say that. We weren't able to achieve the goals we wanted to, but it is off the ground, and we're rocking and rolling now.
The other thing that I really want to make mention of, because it's important, and the three of us on here have been through an election now as a candidate. The pre-poll showed me that it's usually people like us, or the thinkers, or the freedom lovers. We're clearly too polite. I mean, all the abuse always came from the Greens.
Have you seen me on Facebook?
The abuse is just, you know, it's rampant on the pre-polls. And they sprout the lies, they get in your face, they do all that. We don't do that, you know. And people say, oh, we have to get more aggressive. But that's a difficult thing when you're a person who just wants to try and educate people. For example, when I was on the pre-poll, mostly in the evening, I'd go at random times, but I loved the evenings the best. We had late night pre-poll here. About 6 times I got to change people's vote, not change it by talking to them, because it wasn't as packed. People would come over and they would talk. If I can have the opportunity, 15, 20 minutes to talk to people. Now, those 6 people came back to me over the course of a few nights and shook my hand and said, because of what we spoke about, because you got me thinking about it, I voted for you. And I know it's impossible to have that with everyone. And we don't have the time, but that's what I loved most, being able to have the time with people, not to lambast them with my views, to ask questions. That's what I believe is the big thing. Ask people questions, get them to think about it, get them to answer it. And as freedom parties, we all worked so closely together. We had our tents next to each other. We worked very tight. We had Daniel didn't have his own tent from the Lib Dems. You know, he was in with us a lot. We share. There's nothing that we don't have in common. And certainly not the people I had anything to do with here. So it was such an interesting thing, and there's a lot of work to do. And it is around that educating, and maybe that's our role here.
Well, what I think you've pointed out there, Gerrie, is that we're not career politicians, right? None of us here. I'll take the liberty in assuming that. I know that's the case with you, Kate. I assume that's the case with you, Gerrie.
Yes, it is.
You know, so we're not as good at it. You know, plainly speaking, we're not as good at that side of politics as they are. You know, their experience, that's what they do. And, you know, in some ways, we've got to accept the sort of cult of personality and those kind of, you know, bad things that come along with playing in politics. Because it is part of the game, and we do need to know how to deal with that. It doesn't mean we need to be dishonest, and we need to, you know, obviously voters, particularly our voters, want to move away from career politicians. But I think there's an aspect of it that we need to accept and say, well, look, you know, that thing is effective, and that's an effective strategy, and that does work, and we need to take that and use that in an honest way that we can help for our own causes. But I find it interesting as well, because I found in my state election there was a lot less vitriol around, you know, we all got like you know, we had differences of opinion, of course, but I got along with all the Labor people, you know, volunteers, Greens, Liberals, any of the minor parties as well. So I think that's quite interesting that we saw that in the federal election, but I really didn't see that in my state election at all.
I think federal elections, just from my experience being involved in the Liberal Party campaigning for quite a while, the federal elections are definitely more aggressive. Maybe because it's on that bigger playing field. I don't really know, but definitely more aggressive.
It's It's power, ultimately. And there's so much focus on the federal government from particularly the left because the power it gives you power over more people, ultimately.
Which is the part,
so
James,
they will get real nasty.
Yeah, they do. That's right, Drew. And James, that's the bit where I would find it really impossible because, I mean, I love I really love legislation. I love, reading it, interpreting it, putting it into practice, getting in there, being in the chamber, debating would be wonderful. But the ground game politics of being vicious, it's just not in me to do that. It's just not who I am. I couldn't change. I couldn't even compromise to do it. It's a difficult thing for people like us to do that.
Yeah, I mean, it's a difficult balance to make, but, I never thought I would ever be a candidate. I never thought I'd be a financial member of a political party. And a few months later, I was the lead candidate in the SA election. So, we've all gone to uncomfortable places in the last couple of years or months. And I'm not saying like sell yourself out or be dishonest, I think that's the last thing people want. But I think there's a lesson to be taken from the tactics that are used by the major parties and how we can use them without compromising our values and our principles and ourselves, but still take advantage of those tactics.
To take a bit of a different tack for a while, we've been talking a lot about what we can do better, but I think it's time to talk about what you've already been doing well. You've got, in South Australia, One Nation picked up the 11th seat or the 10th seat. In Victoria, the UAP might get a Senate seat. In Queensland, One Nation might get another Senate seat. And then in the Division of Solomon, which is Darwin, the Lib Dems got, I think, 10% of the vote, which is one of the best scores for a minor party that isn't the Greens in any division in lower house in this election. So what are the Freedom Parties doing right?
Well, I want to go first.
Yeah, I mean, I loved One Nation's animation cartoons. We've talked about it before. Again, it's memes. They're brilliantly written comedy. Some of the best political comedy satire the country's ever seen, quite frankly. So that was great. I think there was a issue there where, the retweets only went so far because of the baggage of the One Nation brand. If that was a Liberal Party tool, or Lib Dems perhaps went with some animations like that, I think that could have gone further. I don't know if the Liberal Dems would have had the resistance on social media that it has. Pauline Nation, Pauline Hanson, One Nation above the tweet, and so people are really resistant. But aside from that, I'm struggling. I mean, Clive Palmer, UAP, assaulted me with ads on YouTube. I'll give him that. Like, I'm not sure it was consensual, that relationship, but it was definitely getting to me. There was a lot of advertising there. So
I think the real takeaway of what the Freedom Parties have done right, and maybe this will come across a bit arrogant, but is the candidates. I think we've seen some fantastic candidates that have come out of this election. A lot of people like myself, like Kate, I know, Gerrie, I'm not as sure as, but I believe so, that have, not had political experience before or had limited political experience before, and, have thrust themselves out, put themselves out. To be a candidate's a hard thing to do. You sacrifice your privacy, you sacrifice your comfort, you sacrifice your money, you sacrifice your time. And I think we've seen some fantastic candidates. Victor Tay in Wirrawar, I think it is, in New South Wales, he got 10% odd. As you said, Dr. Sam, that's a bit of a different situation being the incumbent there. But, she got 9%, and we had some star performances all around. And I think, even I have a few issues with some of the UAP policies that came out later, but I know a lot of the candidates. I know yourself, Gerrie. I know Michael Arbin, who's the lead Senate candidate here in South Australia, and they're good. They're really good guys. I might disagree with some of the policies that came out of UAP, particularly towards the end of the campaign, but I know a lot of their candidates are really, principled people and principled libertarians, and I think that's really where we excelled. And the parties really need to find those people, find who those people are, and they really need to support them as much as they possibly can and put them in the right places, because that's what I think is the big win from the Freedom Parties coming out of the SA campaign, in my case, and also the federal campaign.
James, so well said. I agree. Michael, I haven't met him, but he was impressive. There were a lot, and the candidates that I have come to know in Queensland, they are equally as impressive, and it's the best thing. And I will applaud the UAP for picking. They really did go out. I know they went out of their way to make sure they got people like each of us in there, and I believe they succeeded in that. A reflection, demographics, there was no ageism or sexism or anything. It was really a representation of the country, and I will applaud them 100% for doing that, because we all came from all walks of life. I mean, we had UFC fighter Elvis Sinosik in Sydney. I mean, I think it was great. I think it was, to me, I believe the Parliament lacks completely and should be is true representation from the community. They should not be all lawyers. They should not be in there people saying, oh, well, you're not qualified to do this job. We're not getting represented. We're getting dictated to. They rule by decree. They've been doing it for so long now. They pass laws that we don't know about. And I think that's my big, strong point, is to try to push more and more that the Parliament needs to be better represented. If we can survive this 3 years, to do that, so important.
Yeah, definitely agree with you.
I think that's probably why we're all feeling a bit glum and grim about the future, is because if you look at the results, at least 10% of Australians wanted a freedom-friendly voice in the Parliament. And I look at the results now and I'm thinking, who's going to speak for me? There's no one. Like, the Greens are just going to be pushing their socialist agenda, their green energy stuff. The Teals, who got so much media coverage, and why? Yeah. They were independents. They weren't even technically a party. So I think that's why we're probably all feeling a bit down about the next 3 years. But it's an opportunity for us to be there to have that conversation when people who voted for the Greens or the Teals or even Labor, when they turn around and say, why is the cost of living going up? I thought they were going to help us. Why is energy pricing going up? We can be there to have that rational conversation about, well, this is actually why, because you need to think things through. People weren't thinking things through. They were just looking at the 3-word slogans. They were thinking the Greens will save me, and that was the extent of it. So it's now the next 3 years for us is the time to educate people and point to examples of, well, this is what happens when you don't do your research into the end effects of these policies.
Yeah. And I think, there's one thing we're all missing in this conversation, which is the worst performer of the federal election, ironically, was Labor Party, right? They got what, 30-odd% of the primary vote. It's the lowest primary vote total that's formed government since 1910. I think it's the lowest ALP primary vote in their history. If not, it's very close.
Even
they did abysmally.
Yeah.
Right. And they're worried. Trust me, they're worried. They hate the Greens. They hate the Greens more than any one of us here. So they're very worried. And I think, people are looking past that because they won the election. But they've actually, I'm sure internally they are really beating themselves up.
And the Teal team, Team Teal, they're like, what are we doing now? What's the plan for the next election, right? So Labor is definitely worried, and they're going to get that. I think it was very strategic with the Teal operation was targeting Liberal seats, right, in this election. And do they continue doing that, or do they go, no, you know what, we're going to take seats away from Labor? And I think it's ultimately what they're going to do, right? So that's got to be terrifying for Labor, 100%.
Can I ask a question of everyone? Because this gets asked of me, I'm sure it does with all of you as well, about people saying the freedom movement has to join under one political party. Now, we all know there's egos. It's called massive egos involved here. I'm just putting it out there because that's what, I mean, it's a fair question. It's a fair question.
I've got an idea on that. I mean, obviously we've all talked about how we're basically anti-collectivism, and so asking us to collectivize is a silly kind of, it's a bit challenge is there. But I'm a big fan of the Free State Project model in the US, which is not about joining the parties together, but it's about bringing people together geographically. And I think, that's a model that could succeed at state level, particularly, and then broaden out from there. But so, I mean, some other people might have opinions on that, but I think, basically asking libertarians to be collectivists is a real difficult one.
Yeah, I definitely think that's
I like the idea of having a free state, maybe in Tasmania, but I'm from Queensland. That's way too cold for me in Tasmania. So
see, this is the problem
with the weather alone.
This is the problem. We're too soft. We've got it too good in this country, and until we don't, we'll wait till the rubber band breaks and we're all bloody under the boot of tyranny.
Yeah,
look, as far as
I find out more about that. The Free State Project, I need to look into that more.
As far as putting the parties under one banner, I just don't think it's viable, right? I don't think it's going to happen. I think I touched on this earlier on. I really don't think the freedom movement, and maybe I'll get some hate for this, but I really don't think the freedom movement is all that much about freedom, to be quite honest. It's largely a populist movement that's against the COVID stuff, which I agree with. But I would think you'd find it hard pressed to ask any of the people that go to those rallies whether they want the businesses to have the freedom to be able to discriminate based on vaccine status, right? That's, they want the government to have, to use its power in the way that they favor. I don't think they're really talking about freedom. So I think we got to look into that, and we actually got to look into moving past this sort of populist ideal and sort of like, well, I just don't like this thing, so I want the government to have power so they can, go double as hard in the other direction. And we've got to actually move it into a real freedom movement that is actually about freedom and actually about limiting the scope of government. And I, maybe Gerrie won't agree with me here, but I think there's only one party that's really willing to do that, and I think that's the Liberal Democrats.
Oh, no,
I'll echo
anything, James, and I'm actually with you on that. I made a post, which I got a bit of flack for myself towards the end of the election, and it wasn't a flack. I mean, I'm a fan of the rallies. I went to all the rallies. I'm sure we all did.
Same here.
Yeah, but at the end of the day, because going back to what the two majors have the resources for all the volunteers, I think most of us on the ground assumed that we would get more people wanting to help on the booths, even if they didn't put on a yellow or blue or whatever T-shirt we had, that they would help us all. That didn't happen. And that really disappointed me, because I thought, well, going to the rallies, of course it's wonderful. We all love them, but that's not going to change the vote. It's going to happen on the polling booths if we can fill them as much as red and blue do. And that didn't happen. And I made a post as diplomatically as I could, but I also wanted to be honest about it, because that's the other thing I'm passionate about, is being able to be honest and not be vilified. Because isn't that what people want, apparently, in the freedom movement, to go into that place, into the chamber, and stand and be honest? But I didn't see that, and that disappointed me, and it disappointed a few people I knew as well. So I'm with you on that, James.
I think James is right. I don't think there's enough in terms of, like, if we go back and just look at policies full stop. I don't think One Nation UAP have enough in order to consider themselves a proper freedom party. Like, they have the mandate stuff, which is good, like James said, but in terms of like freedom. I don't think that they have enough policy to back them up in terms of being a freedom party. I just don't. There's too many clashes there, I think.
I mean, Liberals, I've always considered them to be minimal government party. Like that, I think that's obviously changed over time. But, the old thing was Labor would stack the bureaucracy, Liberals would come in and gut it and spend less. And, that was the old dichotomy of left versus right. It doesn't seem to be the thing anymore. But, less government, that's what we all share, less government, right? All these freedom parties are like, just get the fuck out of my way, man. Let me do what I want to do with my life. Freedom of speech. There's several things that unite us. And the problem is it's hard to sell less power. It's hard, when you're running for power, there's a real challenge there.
Yeah, that's actually well put, Drew. When you're running for power, yeah, that's true. But
that's something that I personally struggled with as a libertarian is I don't want to be contributing to the size of government. Like I don't want to be anywhere near government. So being a candidate was a daily struggle for me. And I worked for former Senator David Leyonhjelm and he felt the same. He didn't want to be there, but he knew he had to because the only way we can make change is coming to the table of something with a table we will actually want to set on fire. So it's a struggle for us people who don't want government in our lives. But this is the only way because that's the system. We have to be part of the system to change that. And I know James struggled with this too. We had conversations. We don't want to be doing this. We want to be living our own lives. But because we want to make a change and we want to stand up for what we believe in, we have to be part of a system we frankly don't actually like.
Yeah, I think that's very true.
It must be hard to put that game face on every day. I know I'd really struggle with it myself.
Well, being a candidate was simultaneously the most stressful experience of my life and also the most rewarding experience of my life. So, the idea of drawing an income from the taxpayer frightens me. I wake up in cold sweats about it. So getting a six-figure income directly from the taxpayer is not something I was particularly looking forward to. But I didn't anyway in the end, so not to worry. But also, there's no other opportunity you have in life to just go out to a group of people and talk to them unfiltered. You never do that in real human life. You go to your group of friends or whatever, but you've already got a connection. But just to sort of go to a group of people in a park and just speak to them, I mean, when would you ever do that as a normal, rational person if you weren't a political candidate, which maybe makes you not a normal, rational person?
No, that's right. And that's going back to what I said before, whenever I found myself in a position to be able to speak with people and have a conversation with the most rewarding times. And that's right, James. And I didn't struggle with it so much. I mean, I'm not a public person before I did this. I kind of was able to put that behind me somehow. I just thought, and the reason that I could is because our daughter and husband just had their first baby. And I think I've never, it's like everything in life. You don't understand it until you start experiencing anything. And I'd never understood what people who had grandchildren would go on about their kids. But I could not look in his name is Winston. I could not look in that little boy's face and think, well, with the 15 years experience I've had, my knowledge, my study of political theory and history, how can I stand by and do nothing? And as Kate said, this is the system we have. And that's what I used to tell people when they'd say, oh, you're selling out, Gerrie, you're part of it. I said, no, I'm not. This is the system we have. That's all we have to work in. What do you propose we do? If you want change, you want people like me in there. I just put myself out in the public. It's not an easy thing to do. I'm doing this mainly for this little new life in the world and all others like him. What does that say about people like us if we don't take a stand? And that's what I used to say to people. And I still believe it to this day.
I think a lot of the people who say, have an issue with you being part of the system, in their mind, they think they're quite noble being anti it, but the only other way to get rid of the government is not a way that is like you have to basically overthrow it. And I guarantee you, those people who are the biggest advocates for not being part of the system aren't ready to go and overthrow a government. And so it did. That was one of the things that bothered me a lot. I know Stuart and that dealt with it, was that the guys who wouldn't vote. Like I respect your decision not to vote, but if you're going to complain about the system being the way it is, when there's the opportunity there to try and help, you really should bite your own morals in order to try and make the change, because otherwise you're going to leave yourself the only option, which is revolution. But I don't think those people specifically are ready for
No.
I don't think anyone's ready for it, to be honest. I don't think our society is up for that sort of action, which I don't condone either. I'd rather see us change things from inside rather than have to take up arms against your own government. That's a scary notion to walk towards. But that's a battle.
I mean, sometimes you'll even get these, like, I call them like sovereign citizen types, right? And to varying degrees. They talk about, the Constitution isn't real, or the corporation of Australia, or whatever. It's like, it's just, whether they're true or not is a whole other thing. But my sort of thing when I speak to those kind of people is like, look, that may be true, that may not be, but we've got to work within the system we've currently got, and we've got to change it that way. And then we can look at these bigger issues that, that might be an issue for yourself. So I think, it's not just, you need people of all parts. You need people in journalism. You need people, cultural figures and icons. You need political candidates. You need people who are in office, and you need them in the major parties too, not just in the UAP and in Liberal Democrats. You also do need the good. You can't have all the good figures from the major parties leave either, because that's problematic too. So, you need them everywhere, and everyone has a role to play. So I totally agree with you there, Centrist, that we've got to. It's easy to throw stones from the outside, but actually get in and try and make a difference.
Well, on the other hand, though, the argument that anarchists and agorists make in a system where we have mandatory voting is that not turning up to vote, or turning up and doing an informal vote, meaning you mess up the ballot paper, it's not counted, is a way of saying, none of the above. It's a way of rejecting all the options that are given to you, especially if you're an anarchist and you don't believe in any political parties. Which I kind of am a bit. The best option, like I'm not saying violently overthrow the state. I prefer secession to revolution, especially we don't have any guns in Australia either. But I think the problem with that stance, if working from within the system, if you don't believe the system works in the first place, and you don't believe that you can vote, if you don't believe that voting would change anything, then there's no point to voting. And in fact, voting none of the above by not voting or doing a donkey vote is probably the best way forward for those people. If that makes sense.
I'll push back on it a little bit, because obviously some of the parties, like the Lib Dems, were running on voluntary voting. So if you wanted to see that sort of system change so that you only had voluntary voting, you've got to try and give access to the people who are trying to make the change. Like, I understand what you're saying, and I respect people's decision to do it, but maybe not. Maybe they just shouldn't complain about it. If they're not
like, I've done it, right? I've done it before. I've cast many deliberately informal ballots before in my life, and maybe I'll even do it again. But I think it's just it's for me. It's like, particularly given you get a fine if you don't. Like, I do totally get it. I do, because I'm a black-pilled anarchist at heart too. But it's one of those things where it's like, well, you've got to contextualize it within where you've got, the system that you're within. What real benefit do you get from casting an informal ballot? Is it really used as, at the end of the day, people don't know whether you're just too stupid to fill in a ballot, or whether it was some deliberate political stand. No one will know. So, I mean, I think the best thing is to try and, look at the parties that do exist and pick the lesser of the evils, I suppose, if you want to look at it that way.
Not necessarily lesser evil, just ones that want to make the changes. Like,
yeah.
Like, I don't know. Yeah, like you said, no one knows if you did an informal. Like I've done them as well. Like no one knows. No one knows you've done the protest. No one knows that you put in a false ballot. So at the end of the day, what did it even achieve? Just that you ticked your name off, and that was it. If you cop the fine, sure. Like then at least you can say.
I actually have more respect. I have more respect for people who cop the fine.
Yeah.
Mm.
I was going to say.
Okay, sorry, Gerrie.
I was just going to say it's a pity there's not more emphasis on the candidate, the person that you're voting on. Of course, that's where the power and influence of the parties, the machines, because that's what they are. Labor and Liberal are now machines. So many people think, and I've heard it even in the last few days, there are people going back to the Liberal Party, and I don't know, there could be coming from either, UAP or the Lib Dems or anywhere or just left, because they think they're going to change it from the inside. You don't change the machine from the inside.
I spoke to a couple of people who would probably be more anarchists than I am, who was actually working for the Liberals on the pre-polling. And one of the things that I think it's a positive / negative is that the picking of Dutton might mean that the Liberals push towards a more conservative base, which then means hopefully the Libertarian faction separates out. So what goes into the Liberals, I'm hoping will come out as well, because obviously, even if they're a faction within that party, if the choosing of someone like Dutton is a show that they're going to push more conservative rather than libertarian. If that makes sense.
Well, that remains to be seen, because I read an interview yesterday he did in the Saturday paper, and he's already starting to apologise for something he said in the past, and I'm looking at it this way. See, this is what I get back to. If you can't stand on conviction, yes, of course, if you make a mistake on something, you have the right to apologise. But I already read in there, here we go again. You're making amends before you get out of the blocks to try to appease the people that from before, or the decision you made before. Where's the conviction? So I'm seeing early signs, and it is only early days. I'm not sure that's going to happen. None of us are.
On the system, changing the system from within idea, I point to Trump as this interesting case study, right? I mean, we all saw how much of a cultural force that guy was, and how much he was able to come from the outside and just a wrecking ball. And he's created a whole movement, right? The Ultra MAGA movement, I believe it's called. Now, and to a lesser degree, I think we have the ability to do that within our parliamentary system, right? We can't run some crazy cultural figure as president and drive a big movement, but well, you say that, but imagine the change that would have to happen to be I guess actually that's a good point, centrist. The Queen is what, 97? How old is the Queen? Does anyone know?
97. I think you're right. Yeah.
Yeah. So
happy birthday, Queen Lift.
Happy birthday. It will be sad to see you go, but what happens when the Queen dies? Does Australia go down the Republican route instantly and just go, you know what, Charles, we're good, bro. We're going to just go our own way? I think we could conceivably see the Republican movement take on a new meaning post-Elizabeth. And I wonder what that would do for our ability to bring change through the system if we were to have a presidential element to it, where you can parachute in a cultural figure, somebody who's outside of the parliamentary system, which is so rigid and full of factional friction, that it just really discourages people coming up through the system to rise to the top. Yeah. So, we could be seeing real change soon if and when, God bless her, Queen Elizabeth passes on. We will see. The other thing I'd add is that, we do see cultural sort of cult of personality within, the Senate, especially. So Jackie Lambie, right, who's to say Jackie Lambie couldn't run a campaign that really just transcends? You know, who's to say she couldn't harness some kind of magic? I doubt it, but there's room, I think, for personality in the Senate, especially, to drive something bigger. Hopefully, I'm just a few white pills for everybody.
Well, Labor have already proposed. They've got a minister, don't they, for the Republic? Isn't it?
Yeah.
Didn't they announce a minister?
Oh, really?
So that's why I was laughing about it, because the Labor have, or Albo walked it back, but they have talked about becoming a Republic, which I was like, oh, that's not so bad.
The key word is outsider, because there's not a single person in the parliament that I would ever want as president right now. I don't know about the rest of you, but it'd have to be someone, I guess, you know, we're talking like on a Trump scale. It has to be someone with...
What about, sorry, Gerrie, just to interrupt you and push back. What about the WA guy? There's a young WA Liberal guy who came on the scene in, I want to say, 2013. I remember Tony Abbott doing a press conference. He was former military. Does this guy ring a bell?
Hasty.
Yeah.
Hasty.
What about Hastings? No?
No,
No, I've heard a few different things. I don't know. I mean, that's centrist area. You're in WA. You probably know more about him.
I know a little bit, but not much. But it's the same. He got a lot of support, and then obviously scandals pop up.
Andrew Hastie.
That's it.
And Kate might know more.
Well, he was a candidate for the leadership of the Liberal Party, and he didn't even win that. So I think you need to have the support of your party to be in any sort of leadership position. But just going back to what you said earlier, Gerrie, about conviction, and Peter Dutton already going back on some of the things he's done in the past, I think that's a really important point, because for me as a candidate, doing all these sort of interviews and podcasts and doing anything I could to get the message out, I wasn't media trained. Like, I've been a journalist in the past, but there was no media training. There was no party system to say this is what you can and can't say. So every question that I got, I answered based on my principles. So I had a curveball question about what do I think about live export, for example, on the campaign trail. And I answered that saying, you know, if you want to sell your product that way and the market supports you, then you should do that as long as animal welfare standards are adhered to. Sort of questions like that coming out of nowhere. And I remember one of the people who on a podcast turned around at the end of it and said, you are the only person or political candidate that has answered every question straight away. Like, I didn't even have to think about it, because I just knew inherently what I believe because of principles. And this is something James and I disagree on. I think principles in political circles is so important. I think because that shows what you're getting. Like, at least with the Greens, you know what you're going to get. With Liberal and Labor, you don't know. Labor's already come out and said they're going to ban live export. That was never on the table. So all these farmers who voted for Labor are saying, what the fuck, you've just fucked my industry over. But you never said that during the election. And they've already come back on the minimum wage. They said they were going to put a price on the minimum wage. Now they don't have a figure. So at least with us, Lib Dems, you know what you're getting, because we have principles that underline everything we say and do. Yes, there's different factions, but at least at the end of the day, you know basically what you're going to get.
100%, Kate. I'm exactly the same as you. We were asked the same. I live on my principles. I could walk away from the Liberal Party. I walked away a year and a half ago, long before Craig Kelly left to join with Clive. I walked away because I just couldn't stand it. They were not the Liberal Party that they formed. I have no problem doing that because I can't go against what I believe. I answered the same, and I had people saying the same thing to me. And I know my fellow UAP candidates in Queensland, they're exactly like us. And it comes back to this struggle between almost, well, in the system as it stands, we have the parties, but the candidates, if they're living by their principle like that, but then you've got to fall into line with something, that's where the big conflict comes. But then the question comes, well, you're run as independents. Well, then how do you govern as independents? But I mean, that has happened. I guess there's alliances formed and all that sort of thing. But look, I'm with you. I'm 100% exactly the same.
Another example of that is what Centrist was talking about before, the no net zero and the anti-climate change agenda that the Lib Dems ran on. I don't believe in net zero either, unless the market sets that. So because of my generation, I know that people are genuinely concerned about this issue, and we are conscious of what we're doing to contribute. So for Lib Dems to put out a policy saying no climate alarmism, no net zero, but it was just too polarising, especially for the generation that Centrist agrees, the left generation that would agree with our social policies, drug policy reform, those sort of things. You lose them because you're out there saying net zero is a farce. In all the interviews I did, I said net zero should be a thing if that's what the market wants. We should get rid of energy subsidies and let people decide. That's what I was saying, but in the document that was given to me, it was written so polarising, and I think that's why we need to look at our messaging.
So I should probably just clarify. I do actually think principles are very important. But yeah,
I said in the political system, Jane. I said in the political system.
I know.
You have said before that principles don't matter to the everyday voter.
Yeah, what Kate's getting at, I think, is that to be a political party, ultimately, it's a populist machine, right? To run as in politics, it's ultimately a contest of populism. So I think to look past the tactics that populism can provide is, perhaps a bit naive. So I think there's, definitely lessons to be learned from populism that we can incorporate without selling out our principles.
It's very difficult. I mean, I had people, and I know some of the other UAP candidates did, if you'd meet them at markets or wherever you were, and they would say, look, I'd vote for you if you ran as an independent, but I can't vote for you because of Clive. This is what, and I look personally, that didn't worry me. I had no issue with that. If I found I had to, say something positive or defend Clive, if I use the word defend, it didn't bother me. If I didn't have to, that's fine too. We were armed with enough information anyway to be able to point people in directions. But if I would say, but you're voting for me. I mean, and this is the challenge. But as I said, I didn't find it very difficult anyway. But that's the sort of thing that we were getting, which now we knew anyway. But the good parts outweighed all of that, as far as I was concerned. I have no regrets at all. We've all come to know Clive in a whole different way that the public don't, and I'm still grateful that he gave us a vehicle and an opportunity to do this, and I am, and I will remain grateful. But we are all independent thinkers. And a lot of us in the UAP are self-declared libertarians anyway. It's not just me.
I think that's one of the things that the sort of put the majors last campaign, and I totally get the marketing behind it, I do, but it's sort of lost is it's like, no, it's not that simple. There's some times where some independents are worse than the majors. Parties like Animal Justice Party or the Socialist Alliance or whatever they're called. Yeah. They're worse. I'd rather see the Greens in power. I'd rather see Labor in power. I'd rather see Liberal in power than see the Socialist Alliance get a seat. So and there's some good people in major parties, right? Like say here in SA we put ALP number 6 on our Senate How to Vote card because Don Farrell, who is the number 2 on the Labor ticket in South Australia, is a better person to have in than Simon Birmingham, who was the number 2 on the Liberal seat. They both ended up getting those seats. But, it's not that simple of just like, oh, put the majors last, always this party last, or always the incumbents last was something else I saw going around as well. No, like they're all individual candidates and they all have their merit. And I know we don't all have time to deeply analyse every single individual candidate, but it's deeper than just Liberal Party bad, Labor Party bad, Greens Party bad. It's really about individual candidates and promoting the right people in the right parties.
Yeah, and I agree with you, James. The blanket put the majors last, didn't work really anyway, because there were, things that happened. There were certain candidates that were, considered better. So the blanket statements are a problem. But when you start to go out on that, well, for me, I need to stick to my word. It's very important when I put something out there. And I did that. I stuck to my word. As it was, I mean, in my seat anyway, I was, more than happy. The four of us worked so well together, and the other three people were great, outstanding individuals. And there really wasn't anything that we differed on, quite frankly.
I think there was an interesting awakening for me with this election on the preferential voting system. When we say that the majors last didn't work, we did see the lowest Labor primary vote for 100 years, right? And we saw the Liberals get a massive swing against them in certain areas. So there was some impact. There was definitely some resentment in the electorate, but what it sort of demonstrated to me that no matter what happens with the primary vote, that the preferential system will stack it somehow, and we'll end up with a government that is basically 32% of the electorate primary vote, which is kind of just crazy to me. Is like that can be what we consider representative democracy. It's like. And it's always, the system has always worked like this, but it's now starting to show, I think, some cracks where it's like, not sure we're representing everybody very well right now.
We're not, but what's really concerning is that Labor believe they have a mandate. I've read that quite a few times in the last week where they say, well, we've been given the mandate. Well, actually,
of course they're going to say that.
You haven't.
Yeah, of course they're going to say that. Of course, and God, have they got a difficult time ahead of them? They've got to appease the Greens and the Teals in the Senate. They've got a massive clusterfuck awaiting them to rule and to make change and to bring things to the table. So good luck to them, I say. I think we're going to find a bit of a smoking ruin at the end of the 4 years that gets voted out, is my hope and instinct, because there's just too many people stirring the pot, too many chefs in the kitchen. We'll see.
Hey,
I think we'll see.
Figures for you, Drew. I've got some figures for you. Labor's primary vote, 32.58%. The LNP's primary vote, 35.63%.
Yeah. So we literally got the 1/3 of the country's primary vote is ruling over the other 66%. It's kind of crazy when you think about it.
It is.
But
I think, though, I wouldn't want to see any other system than the preferential system. I mean, like, you could make the same argument about Donald Trump and the Electoral College, right? And people did, obviously, and not winning the popular vote. I mean, that happens in a lot of electoral systems where the popular vote winners don't win government. First past the post, I really don't like that system. You see a lot of, and basically minor parties do not exist.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think it's the best worst system. The worst,
Well, yeah, I agree it is, but then it still doesn't deliver us the right government. That's. I mean, it might
depends
work
on your opinion of what the right government is.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, I think you'd find most people who voted for the Greens would rather see Labor than Liberal, and that's why Labor won, right?
Yeah, totally.
So in that way, it's kind of fair.
I think, Gerrie, we get oscillation between the two parties. If we had a party in power for 25 years, maybe we could say there's something really, really wrong. But the fact that we're going between them shows that there is movement. I guess that's a positive.
Well, at the moment, it was that way, Drew, but they're a uni party for the last, however, 2 terms. They're just the same. There's nothing that separates these two. Nothing.
That's why the education messaging going forward is a key thing.
Yeah, that's right.
Especially around the preferencing voting. I think that's going to be, if you want to see, because the system's there to be able to be like to support the miners if you can get the messaging out right. But if we don't focus on that, I don't think that's where we're going to struggle in terms of trying to make a change.
Yes.
I think you'll see the major parties will struggle next election cycle because they'll have a lot less money because they got a lot fewer primary votes. You know, and we won't. And that'll take longer to flow through, but you will see that, and that'll be noticeable.
Just got to keep hammering them. Keep hammering them.
Exactly. And I think the thing with the Greens, I think a lot of it was like just a protest vote, you know, because it is the third option in Australia, right? And a lot of people don't know that much, and you know, they generally like the environment, but they don't really know much more about the Greens. So they think, you know, it's a pox on both your houses kind of thing, and well, I'll just vote for the Greens then. I know a lot of people personally who did that, who aren't particular Greens.
I don't think it was a protest vote. I think, and I've said this to you before, is they didn't say anything for 2 years. It was actually a genius campaign. They didn't say anything for 2 years. And then in the lead up to the election, free education for all, dental on Medicare, things that people who are struggling to make ends meet wanted to hear. And those 3-word sayings that we were talking about before, that's all people listen to. They don't read a freedom manifesto with 10 policies with thought out, detailed citations in it. They just listen to the first 3 words, and that's what they vote for. And we saw it at the booth, James. We saw people seeking out the Greens because they're the younger people at uni who will never pay off their HECS debt. That's what they think. So free education for me, thank you. But it was a really smart campaign by the Greens. And yes, they have started this back in the 70s. It's been a cultural movement. They've infiltrated corporations as well. You see it in the HR departments. We don't have that yet in our movement. And that's something that we really need to focus on. We can't just be like 6 months before an election, we better get our shit together. Like, it needs to be dedicated time, and it will take years. It will take years.
The strange thing is, though, with the Greens is that they were all for the mandates. That's the whole ridiculous thing with them.
But they didn't run on that, Gerrie. The thing is, they didn't actually talk it up in the public. They had that policy, but they didn't even mention it. All of their stuff was focusing around taxing the billionaires and giving you free health care and dental and university. They didn't even talk about the mandates. You wouldn't even know that they had it if you weren't paying attention to politics.
Because in my seat, there was I don't know the exact number, but I know quite a few people who voted Greens all their lives. So they're, you know, around my age, a little bit younger and older. And so they're from the original Green movement. You know, the original one where they eat well, they own the organic food stores where we shop, all that sort of thing. I mean, they voted for me, not just because they knew me, and they would normally, the statement was from a couple, I'll forgive Clive this time for the mining, but they said, we will never forgive the Greens for voting for forced vaccination. And that is what I got a few times. Now, I know we got some of the more mature voted the Greens, wouldn't have got it from the young ones. But this is where the interesting thing between the Greens.
It's a new generational shift and we see it, I think, through social media. The acceptable opinion is shrinking, and I think that's what led to the COVID mandate acceptance within the Green movement. Is like, don't step out of line, guys. You'll get someone will TikTok you or something. They'll, you know, cancel you. You know, they'll come for you. It's a cultural thing, you know, through social media. That's what's changing the left, I think, to some degree.
I'm sure that part of the reason why the Greens got votes, at least the primary votes, is because of the free stuff. But on the other hand, James is correct. A lot of it was being strategic. I looked at the preference flows in Griffith, and Greens won on preferences from the UAP, One Nation, and Lib Dems.
Yeah, that's right.
So people who voted Greens first, often free stuff. But if they didn't vote Greens first, we still gave them a preference. It's because it was strategic. So I said it's probably a combination of both. Because at least in Griffith, and we'll probably say in Brisbane and Ryan as well, in the city of Brisbane, that the Greens won in part because of those Freedom Party preferences.
They were
There's
inner
your-
city, those 3 inner city seats. Yeah, I know Rob McMullen, who ran there for the UAP. It was just taken over by the Greens. Those 3 inner city seats. But even in my seat, so we're a middle ring seat, sort of used to be regarded, that term they used to use, aspirational, where young families, the home, build the jobs, the careers, that sort of thing. There's like a third of the population here has a mortgage, according to the census data that I looked at. So you consider that kind of what used to be said as aspirational. The Green vote here was off the charts. The Green vote here was not that much less than the Liberal primary vote. That's how bad it was.
I think the other thing that they do well is that they play on the emotions. Everything the Green says is about emotion, and we want to look after you because you don't know how to look after yourself. And they're very good at, they've beaten people down to that level where the first thing Australians do when something goes wrong is they turn to the government. What are you going to fix this situation? And that's been a cultural thing. The Greens have beaten people down, taken away idea of individualism, and said we all need to look after each other. But that's something that we need to educate people on, especially my generation, who think the Greens are the best thing since sliced bread. No, they actually don't believe that you can have personal responsibility to make your own decisions, to lead your life the best way you know how to. And they've given that power to the Greens because they trust them, because the Greens have got their trust. Now that's going to be an uphill battle for us. I know we can't believe that because we love our individuality and we stand by our choices, right or wrong, and we deal with the consequences. People don't want to do that. People don't want to take responsibility. People want someone else to look after them, and the Greens have given them the answer. It's scary, but that's the reality.
It's such a weird thing too, because the Greens used to be quite libertarian. They were like, I remember, if you want to talk about anti-vaxxers, typically like the predominant anti-vax, proper anti-vaxxers were from the left libertarian side. They were anti-corporation, anti-medical intervention, anti-forcing people to do stuff. It's insane watching it. The Greens go from what would have been considered a left libertarian party to like a left authoritarian party. It's been quite the move.
They didn't. People that I know in my area, the old school Greens. That's them. These are people who are just aghast. But there's really not enough of them. There's more than
I'm old enough. I'm old enough to remember Kevin 07 running on climate change as the biggest threat to our existential existence, in the history of the world. That issue has been bubbling away for 15 years, right? Without really a lot of movement in terms of we've solved the problem, guys, it's going away. And I talked about this earlier, nuclear, right? Could have neutralized the issue. Should the government be involved in the market? The Lib Dem guys will probably say no, right? But shouldn't we have built nuclear power plants to neutralize the issue? And wouldn't that have put the Greens and the Teals out of the equation? Is that too hard for you Lib Dem guys to say, no, the government shouldn't do this? Or can you get behind that kind of a policy?
Well, the reason nuclear is not allowed in Australia is because of the government. That's why we don't have nuclear. They put a ban on it. So the Lib Dems, and again, this goes back to the messaging around how the climate stuff was pushed, was that the whole point was to get the government out of the involvement and allow the market to take over, which we would have seen growth in nuclear, which we should have started at 10 years ago. You're right. But the reason why we hadn't started is because there's a ban on it.
Who put the ban in? Was it the coalition?
It was when the Australian Democrats were in. So it passed the Senate because of the Australian Democrats. And I'm old enough to remember when the Greens voted against a carbon tax in the Senate. So whenever they talk about climate change or the environment, they're hypocrites. And I've spoken to James about this. There's one thing I can't stand is the hypocrisy of the Greens. And you can see it in so many different ways play out. So for them, I just think, and nuclear, unfortunately, has turned into the other N word. If you say nuclear, you get looked at funnily. But if you want low carbon energy, the government needs to repeal the ban on nuclear power and get out of the way. Like even in WA, there's a moratorium on mining uranium, but you can explore it. So why would a company explore for uranium when if they find something, they can't do anything with it anyway? Government needs to get out of the way and let the business and the market decide. So Lib Dems aren't against, we're just against subsidising anything. We just want the government to get an equal playing field for everyone, get rid of any subsidy for coal as well and renewables, and let the market and the companies decide.
See, I'm shaking my head because you're trying to sell get out of the way, and I'm trying to sell build a fucking nuclear power plant to save our world and to get those greens out of our personal lives, because ultimately that's what manifests, right? Is that they get power because this issue is in the ether. So yeah, I think it's a much harder sell to try and say get out of the way and let the market do it than it is to say we can solve this problem, guys.
I think most people aren't going to look into that nuance.
That is something that UAP, that's one of the policies that we put forward. So, I mean,
I think most people aren't. Sorry, yeah, I think most people aren't going to look into that nuance, really. They're just going to hear nuclear, and that's probably where they'll draw the line at. But I think nuclear is not as much of a dirty word as it used to be. I think we're actually seeing people come around a lot. I think, parties like the Liberal Democrats and even UAP, as Gerrie said, are probably ahead of the curve a little bit on this one. I think I wouldn't be surprised if you see the Greens adopt nuclear as part of their policy in the next 10 or so years. I think you see it already in the US with the Democratic Party, who've started to slowly embrace nuclear. I think you're seeing the message that it's quite a green energy form is actually permeating, and like even places like Reddit, on like Adelaide, which are very left wing, subreddits, and Reddit itself is very left wing. There's already people saying, look, I think nuclear is the way, as part of a mix at least.
The Greens in Holland just advocated for it.
Yeah.
That should have been massive messaging. Like, yeah, it's because if you, I think the Rogan did a couple of episodes back to back with the two guys on the opposite side of the climate alarmism. Ironically, they shared a lot of the same values. They just didn't agree whether it was an emergency. But both of them said, like, including the guy who was pro renewables, is like you need to have a energy source as a backup to the renewables, and the cleanest and the most efficient one is nuclear. And even the guy who is pro, like, the world's going to end in 1,000 days or whatever it is, was like, we still need to have nuclear to have backup because gas doesn't work. Like Texas saw when they had the cold happen, that it froze and fucked up all the pipes. Sorry, language. But even he was still then saying, well, instead of fixing that, why don't they build nuclear? And that's the guy who's like on the extreme terms of like, we need to make change now. So it's interesting.
I think the Overton window's already moved on nuclear.
Yeah, I agree. And maybe you could run on the repeal the nuclear moratorium. Maybe you could run on something like that. A simple message, right? But the thing that brought me around to nuclear is watching Chernobyl. Does anyone see the HBO show? I watched that TV show and I'm like, I think I'm pro-nuclear now, after watching them melt down. Just the incompetence of the old technology. I went down a rabbit hole after watching that show of people talking about how the technology has evolved and learning about how it's the most safest energy creation system we have.
Yeah, that's right. I remember Clive, it's not my area of expertise at all, but I remember we had a discussion one night. Oh, the cat, beautiful cat. Clive was going through all that too, all the clean technology and everything. I mean, yeah, we had right up front out their policy on it to remove all of that. And So if the Greens and Labor adopt it, well, they're adopting it because, you know, they got in there and probably getting it from those of us who were already pushing it. But anyway,
Well,
I guess it's a start.
I mean, the Labor are right in the trenches now dealing with this gas crisis. They've just called a state federal, I can't remember what they called it, but they're bringing together all the energy ministers to discuss the crisis right now. So they are staring down the barrel of economic crisis as we speak. And one would hope some sanity will prevail at some point, that we can't just keep chipping away at our energy production systems and hope that this stuff doesn't happen anymore.
What state is going to put up their hand first for prevailing sanity? Because it's not going to be ours, Stuart.
I think it should be South Australia. We've got the best land for it. We've got so much uranium. We're the perfect place for nuclear.
Lead the way, guys.
I'm happy to let South Australia be the nuclear state.
Yeah.
Well, even just the building of the plants, like I always under the assumption that it takes like decades to build a plant, but who was it in our group was saying that you can even get modular versions now that are built and ready to go in like less than 10 years. So the technology's there. It's just whether we allow it.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
End the nuclear moratorium.
Yes.
Yeah.
That's definitely a start, right?
Which should have been the Lib Dems' messaging around climate in this last
Yeah.
Election. I think a better way to do it. Yeah.
I mean, in Victoria, if you're, say, digging up minerals, you're exploring or digging up minerals. If you so happen to dig up uranium as a byproduct, that's not even what you're looking for. You've got to put it back in the ground. Like, that's how ridiculous it is.
The other thing is that the nuclear reactors and stuff that they're using now isn't even using uranium. They're using this thing called thorium, which is like much more abundant than uranium and has less of the risks involved with it. So it's not even even worrying about uranium's not even an issue. You just need to
Well, I mean, even uranium's quite harmless, right?
Yeah.
I could go around holding uranium and I'd be fine. People think like you've got to, wear the big lead and all that.
You're not going to turn into a superhero? Not going to turn into a superhero?
No, unfortunately.
Gosh, we could use a few of them at the moment, couldn't we? They're in short supply.
Yes, send us a hero.
But I do think that goes to a good point. And I think you were saying it earlier, Gerrie, is like the sort of leader, having a strong leader. I think we've got to resist that temptation, though, because I think really a politician is actually a follower, right? By definition, they follow the votes. They follow the vote, the will of the voters. So I think, while you do want someone to have conviction and principles, I think we've got to resist this. Like, we need a really big, strong leader to come in and show us how it's done, because usually that's actually leads to worse outcomes and better ones.
I couldn't disagree more, James. And nuclear is a great example of why we need someone to stand out from the crowd and stand outside of the consensus and put the argument forward and become that singular voice, because I think the Greens movement has done a great job at smearing nuclear energy for the last 40, how many years? And so to take that risk and for Scott Morrison to have come out 10 years ago, or to Malcolm Turnbull or Tony Abbott, whoever it was, that was not going to be a vote winner. It was going to be a 3-year debate, and I think the last time we saw that kind of politics is John Howard. Not a big fan, but the guy knew how to plant the stake in the ground and then sort of try and move forward with it. He usually planted horrible stakes in the ground, but he created a debate. He sort of put it out there and he said, we're going to argue this case. And I think that's what needs to happen. And it's not a populist thing. I don't think it can go that way, but leadership is required for those challenges when we get ourselves where we are now, which is in Overton shrinking window mode.
Yeah, that's
I don't
true.
think.
Absolutely true, James. However anyone feels about Howard, it's that style that I believe we are in desperate need of, with that he would speak, he would say it, he wouldn't waver, he wouldn't make excuses. Whether it's him or someone, like, we need that right now. This country needs someone. And he wasn't. I mean, John Howard was the least charismatic person ever.
Pretty bad.
Right? But he was effective by his conviction and, like you said, planting the stakes. We do need leadership. And yes, James, you are right too. I mean, this is the stuff I used to love studying in ancient history. It's the fine line of, like Cicero, who's my sort of hero from the Roman world. This is what he lived by. This is what he wrote his primary sources on. That's what we have. You put the best person in the job, but how do you make sure that that person doesn't fall over into tyranny? What needs to happen? And I suppose that's my mantle that I've taken up. And it's a tricky one.
Yeah, very tricky.
Yeah, I think like leadership's important. I definitely agree, but I think it's better if it comes from outside Parliament than within. And also, like, I think it's something. Whereas, like, we have the luxury in some ways as being in minor parties, where we don't need to appeal to 50% plus one, right? To get into the Senate, you need 14%. To get into most lower upper house chambers in various states across the country, it's somewhere between 2.5% to 5%, let's say. So, you know, we do have that luxury where we can actually afford to alienate people. You know, we can say, look, you're probably best off not voting for us. You know, we can say that. And I did during my campaign. I don't know if you guys did, but during my campaign, I certainly did say that a few times. And not all the time, but a few times I'd say that. So we do have that benefit. And there can be characters like that in, say, Senates and upper house chambers. But I think in terms of Prime Minister and lower house and those kind of areas, I think we need to resist having a strong man leader.
But you still need someone to motivate people. Like, I know as libertarians, and I found this, like you were here, James, we found it very hard asking people to do things because we don't want to tell people what to do. So every day was a struggle because we didn't want to do that to someone. But you do need to have somebody to bring everyone together and to get everyone under the same tent. Otherwise, it's like herding libertarians. We're all trying to run around and achieve the same thing, but we don't have a strategy or discipline to execute it, because we're also conscious of the fact that we're individuals and we don't want to tell people what to do. And I think we saw that in WA because we were rebuilding the party at the same time as contesting an election, which is not ideal. So that's something I personally struggled with as the lead Senate candidate. And somehow the leader, I just fell into that because we needed to have somebody not dictating or ruling with an iron fist, but motivating people and giving people direction. So leadership to us is a different term, I think.
Oh, definitely. Definitely you need that internal leadership within a party structure. Definitely, 100% agree with that. Otherwise, you're not going to get anywhere. But I think it's different when you're talking about leading the country. You know, that kind of terminology, leading the country, that kind of stuff. I think that's where you got to watch out. And there is some benefit to it, as everyone's outlined, but I think you got to resist the temptation to yearn for the glory days of the strongman leader.
Ultimately, I think what we're talking about is a salesman or woman, someone who can sell ideas and policies. And quite often being a salesman or woman is difficult and challenging if you're trying to sell real change.
Well, it is difficult in today's world, particularly because there are so many hot button social issues at play without
Weapons.
naming. Yeah, they're weaponized. So, and it's the politicians are all afraid to say something because they'll be alienated. Now, that's the world, that's the political environment we are now in. Now, and long term, that won't help the country. So eventually someone will have to appear to be able to have that persuasion. It's not so much it's because what James is talking about, I agree, it's the dictator that we don't want to see come out, but it's the power of persuasion That is what we need, a persuasive person who is also not even necessarily liked by everybody. It's not likable, they're persuasive. And that's the trick, and it's the perennial problem we have.
For sure.
All right. Well, I think we're hitting 2 hours. So before we finish up, I would really like to have Kate talk about what your plans are for the state election and what you're hoping to achieve moving forward with the party. And same with you, Gerrie, on your level in Queensland there as well. So if you guys want to give us a bit of a rundown on that, that'd be cool.
Well, we've got 2.5 years until the state election. So for the party here, I'm kind of glad that we have that long, because Victoria, for example, has theirs in November and then New South Wales in March. We have the luxury of time in Western Australia to really build on this movement. Like Gerrie said, I've met so many incredible people during this campaign, so many people who are motivated to take time off their work and away from their families to really contribute to something. So it's building on that, and the WA state election is the most winnable election for minor parties. So we need to grow. We need to keep tapping away at it. We can't let people forget, especially what McGowan has done to us. We need to remind people, and we need to constantly be in people's faces. So we've got a bit of work to do, but we've got time to strategize. So I'm definitely staying in WA. I'm definitely here for the long term. I'm a libertarian through and through, and as much as I can do to be part of growing this movement, I will. In terms of my own candidacy, if I'm the best person to run at the state election, I will. If someone better comes along, I'll take a back seat. 2.5 years to see. And Centrist, I hope you're going to be running for us. Then I'll hold you to that.
Yeah, I've told him to already, so he better.
Yeah, we said that too. State election here is 2 years away, and no, I won't be running in any state elections. I'm not quite sure yet what UAP are going to do, because we've registered federally. So we're still waiting to see if there's, I think Ralph Babbitt is still in with a chance, I believe, in Victoria in the Senate, which will then place us as a parliamentary party. But anyway, we're not quite sure what's happening there. But my interest has always been federal, very much federal. In fact, I mean, my first love is the Senate. That's where I've always had a great love for the Senate. But I honestly don't know what's going to happen for the moment. I just want to get back into ALN. I want to get back to my writing. So we all certainly have a lot to write about. I've also had, just different, even since the election, I've been exposed to a lot in the health system, which has been very interesting, especially coming off the back of a federal campaign to be in the parliament. So I've got a lot of things to research and write about. So my focus is getting, back to ALN, and we'll just wait and see what happens with the direction that UAP take. But I'm not going anywhere, and politics is too much in me. The good part, because politics does matter. It does matter.
Can I ask Gerrie why you wouldn't run for state? And I say this because I believe that local is going to be, grassroots is going to be the best way forward for the libertarian movement. And the localer, the better. The more you can leverage your local connections and networks, I think you've got a better chance. Why you wouldn't do it?
The seat I live in here is now so hardcore Labor safe. We've gone in federally from this election. We've gone from the most marginal seat in the state, the third most marginal in the country, to now one of the safest seats Labor held. The state is the same, and council is the same. I guess my interest really is federal. I mean, clearly, if they, again, depending, it's 2 years away, and depending on what UAP do going forward and how many people want to set up state, if they do want to go state, I mean, I'll be there. I'll I'll support someone who wants to run for state, but I won't run for state. So, but I'm definitely there for all my whatever I can contribute.
Mm-hmm.
And on that token as well, are you planning on running in 2028, James? Or when
26.
the next
26?
Yeah, 26. Yeah, that's the one.
Well, I mean, that's 4 years away. So I'm kind of in the same boat as Kate there. You know, if there's a better person at the time, I'm more than happy to step aside and let them run. But if not, I probably intend to. But before that, and to echo some of the things that have been said already, well, we've got a by-election coming up in Bragg on the 2nd of July. So that's a state level district here in SA. So there will be that. And then there's local council elections coming up in November, and there's more going through. And, you know, look, I've actually personally never voted for a local council election before, but I'm going to start. And I think it's very important. That's another thing the Greens have done really well is infiltrate it. Maybe infiltrate's the wrong way, but is to get involved at local council levels. You know, it's really important. Local council, state governments are where most of the things you actually deal with in your everyday life are placed. Healthcare, education, you know, all the roads, those kind of things are largely dealt with at a state level. So state government is very important. I know it's not as exciting as federal government, but it's very important. And local government is also very important. And I think I put a post on all my social media platforms on the 22nd of May, the day after the election, and said, today's the day where you've got to start, right? Today, the 22nd of May is the best day to start getting politically active, because you can bet that all the major parties, they probably have plans to the 2031 election, right? We've got to move past this, and Kate said it multiple times, and I completely agree. We've got to move past this, like, oh shit, an election's coming up in 6 months, scramble together some ragtag team and try and contest it, to actually having a multi-cycle system where we build and build over multiple cycles and actually get stronger and better over that time.
Yeah. Well, I think it's probably a good place to finish up. We've passed the 2 hour mark. As a final thought from me, we've got a comment from FYI Australia saying we need a regular Liberty news service. You're looking at it right here. Looking at ALN as a regular news service. You know, earlier Centrist mentioned the Mises Caucus in the US Libertarian Party, and that's a caucus led mostly by podcasters. So there's always an option there. Is there anything anyone wants to plug before we finish up? And where can people find you as well, James, Kate, and Gerrie?
So you can find me on Facebook. I've got a unique last name, so usually you'll find me pretty quick. JamesHol, HOL. Instagram, JamesHol, James_Hol_SA, and also Twitter, James_Hol. Again, unique last name. You'll probably find me pretty easy on any of those platforms.
I have a unique last name too, so get around me on Facebook because my meme game is next level. So Drew, keep an eye out for my memes, because you're right, that's how we change people's minds. It's not through big policy documents for everybody. We need to educate people through all the ways that are available. So find me on Twitter, Lady Liberty WAUS, and Facebook, Kate Fantinel -Lady Liberty. I'm on Instagram as well, but yeah.
Well, my main platform is Twitter. I don't use Facebook that much. Our party Facebooks are being closed down tomorrow anyway. So mine is Gerrie at Watchtower Rome too. And Twitter's, it's conversational. It's the most conversational platform, which is what I like.
All right, and before we finish up as well, next week's podcast, same time, 10 a.m. AEST, 8 p.m. EDT. We'll have CD back, and first we're back. We're doing a Q&A about the Australian government constitution. If you have any questions for that podcast, email it. We have an email address now, so you can email us at submissions@australianliberty.network if you have any questions for that podcast that you want to get in advance. Any questions that are emailed to us, we'll get to on the show. If you ask questions on the day, if we have too many questions, we might have to leave some of those for a second point in time. But other than that, thanks everyone for hanging around for a longer show, but I think everyone enjoyed it.
Can I just say thank you to everyone, Gerrie, Kate, Centrist, James, for fighting the good fight. We know we didn't get the result we wanted, but for me, this is ground zero, and I look forward to working with you all moving forward.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, everyone.